So now I have these all nice and lined up. I'm just going to solder them again with hard solder so that when I assemble my ring, I can go and put it together with medium solder. So let me just get my solder on here. And so I keep my solder on a titanium piece of sheet metal just so that it's always where I want it. And I know that I'm not looking around, and I know that the solder that I'm presently using is the correct solder. So I'm just gonna boric acid again, methyl hydrate, reduce the chances of fire scale. Got my solder joint over here. I'm just gonna prep both of them at the same time. Put this one off to the side, grab my soldering pick, a little bit of flux, and I'm gonna flux the second one as well at the same time, just so that I don't have to grab my solder with my soldering pick and position it on the joint, turn it over, looks good. Do the second one, same thing. I'd like actually the solder to be on the inside. There we go. Because the torch is on this side, it'll draw it all the way through and I don't have to turn it over. So I'm just going to quickly throw these two into the pickle now that they're ready to go. And I'm going to prep my braid. So the braid, we'll just take this out of the way for a minute. The braid has to fit around here, making sure this is tidy. And I want to choose the best portion of the braid. And when you're doing a braid, there's often an inside and an outside, so a flatter side and a rounder side. In this case, it's here. And this is pretty decent right here at the beginning. So I'm going to start by cutting right, I'm going to start by putting my saw blade back in. And I'm thinking one of my students used my saw frame because I almost never release it there. Anyways, so when I'm deciding where to cut my braid, I want to decide based on what's easiest to clean. If I cut it right down the middle of this, it's going to be difficult to get into the whole thing. In this particular case, the ideal joint would be on an angle so that the solder joint is back in and under. I'm not sure that's going to line up, but I'm going to give it a try because, again, that would be ideal. So I'm going to cut one back and I'm going to follow along this edge, and then I'm going to come back the other way. So I've got a V. I usually just cut straight on a lot of them, but in this case it'll hide my solder joint significantly. So now I have braided this. It's got a lot of spring in it, so I'm going to anneal it before I continue. So again, methyl hydrate and boric acid, just to, when I'm soldering or annealing it, it shouldn't be an issue. And I don't really need my soldering area for this. So I'm just going to quickly anneal this braid so it doesn't deform quite as much. Annealing, 3/4 melting temperature, generally a nice red color. You can see how it's bending down. That's how we know it's annealed. I'm just going to let it cool off for a second here. Maybe my furnace will turn off so that the sound is better. Once that's cut, I'm just going to wrap it right around this braid or this core, And I am gonna put this into the pickle because I didn't have enough time to pickle it last time around. So once I have this done, let's make sure that's cool enough. So easiest thing to do, half round pliers, hold it gently right here, wrap it around, just like you're doing a big jump ring. And I look at this and I'm holding it really tight, nice and tight all the way around. I believe that this here will fit right into here. So I'm going to cut it right along there. And then that'll be my cut on this one. If it's slightly smaller, that will actually be good because it'll let me stretch this just a smidgen. So I'm going to cut it across here first, making sure not to cut into the rest of the braid. So I'm just going to straighten it out. And then I'm going to cut it along here. Make sure I cut the right one. So I'm going to cut it across here. Oh wait, it's this one, see? I can always get confused. So in this case, I'm just going to wrap this around. And again, I'm just using these because they do a good job and they don't mar anything. What they'll also do is they will curve this spot right here. Pepe Tools has a great ring stretcher. So now I just have to get that soldered into there. Now there's a little bit of a overhang here or there. So I'm going to grab my Moore's disc, wherever that happens to be. And I'm just going to clean it up a little bit to make sure that's a nice tight fit prior to going forward. If it's not the better job I do right now, the less likely people will notice that there's anything, they'll notice the joint. So it's all about hiding this joint. So in this case, I'm just going to give this a little bit of a tweak. I would not file any of your braids or weaves. I only use a Moore's disc because the chances of them tearing or moving the braid or the basket weave is greatly increased when you are filing it. Plus, I can get right in here with my Moore's disc. And it looked like there was a little burr on the inside. That's all it takes. You can see how that's going to line up nicely. I just want to gently get this together. I might just do it with my fingers. Now, when I'm putting this together, I want to make sure that my solder joints, you can see how this one sticks out just a little bit. I'll be okay with that. I think it should be fine. I'll just take that down just a smidge. Make sure it lines up in both directions. I think I should be okay with that. Now this one here, this braid here, it weaves under, so I do have to make sure that right here, this guy here is angled down just a little bit so that it looks like it's going under. And This variation, that's actually from the change in the braid as things went along. So now that I have that, I'll bring my soldering area back up. In this case, I'm going to use cross-locking tweezers. Oops, sorry, hit the camera there. Just make sure we're on the soldering area. In this case, I'm going to use the cross-locking tweezers so that I can hold the braid up. So I'm going to solder it from the inside. And I'm going to want some, I could use some medium solder here, but so most people should use medium at this stage. I'm actually going to try to hold this sideways. Make sure I can point I always point my solder joints directly towards me so I know where they are. Make sure that this is nice and tight. And it's not quite as tight, that's better. So my recommendation is medium solder for this, for most people. I've been soldering for 30 plus years. I'm going to use hard solder for this. So if you don't have at least 4 or 5 years soldering experience, then I suggest you use medium. Now, 3 pieces of solder, because I've got 3 wires right here, which means I have 3 joints. So I'm not positive I'm gonna need 3 pieces, but it's a good idea. So I'm just gonna dip, turn my torch on. Grab my solder pick, flux, and I'm gonna flux this whole area this time. I'm gonna put my solder on this edge right here, and then back on this edge, and then I'm going to turn it over and put one on the inside. So I'm going to start with the top edge and the bottom edge. I'm going to file this just a smidgen. So I'm putting it on the edge here because 2 reasons. This is where this particular braid is touching. But if I just snuggle it just to the back, just a little bit here, I get it on the front of my solder pick. Come on. Get over there, you. If I snuggle it just back here, when the solder flows, I'll be able to clean it up and you won't even see the solder joint. There we go. And I have a bit of extra solder there and I'm okay with that. Same thing with this one. Now this one, because of that little sticky out bit, doesn't really want to go where I want it to go. And there we go. Now I'm just going to turn the braid over. Make sure I can see it. How do I want to grab this? For you to be able to see it, I'm going to put it right there. A little bit of hard solder, and right there you can see that joint right in the middle. The 3rd wire is underneath. So I'm just going to heat it. Looks like it's twisting inside my... There it goes. And good. So that'll hold together nicely. And you can see it's my solder joint right here. I know it's my solder joint because it's there. Now that little gap that's there, I'm going to leave it because it actually helps look like it goes underneath. So I'm going to pickle this, and then I'm going to grab my other 2 pieces and keep working on those. So, and we don't need this quite right at the moment. So here's my two side pieces. And here's my core. We're going to get one of these on, but before I do that, I want to make sure, and I'm just going to use this to show you on the side. You can see it's all wobbly, so it's not flat. So I can't really solder that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to find my mallet. I'm going to set it down on here and give that a little tap. And while I'm here, I'm just going to do the second one as well. Just make sure that, two things, it's dead flat. And before you do this, make sure there's no pieces of solder sticking out the side or anything like that. Now, when I put this on here, it is going to be hard to clean this inside edge. So I'm going to determine which side is going to be my inside. It doesn't really matter. In this case, I'm going to put it on this side. And I'm going to take, and I'm going to sand this side and get it prepped. I could even pre-polish it if I was concerned. In this case, there's a silver ring that's going to tarnish. So this whole side is going to tarnish, so I'm not too stressed. And the braid is going to hide it anyways. Now, same thing with this. I'm going to give it a little bit of a cleanup. And then I'm going to make sure that this little guy here just slides on here. It's got to be a tight fit. No. That's a little bit too tight, so I'm just going to quickly take it over to my ring stretcher, or I could just slide it up on my mandrel. Give it a little tap. What we want to make sure, if we use our mandrel or our ring stretcher, is that we don't curve, we make sure that that's still flat. So in this case, my band has a little offset because I didn't cut my blank quite perfectly. I'm going to make sure that that's over. You can see how tight this is going to be. It's actually a little bit small still. And I don't think I'm going to be able to force it. So I don't want to take, might be able to just take a little off of this edge. Once it gets on there, I should be able to, now my solder joints, where do they go? I like to line them all up, personally. So now you can see that's on there nice and tight, so that's our side band. I always make sure I push it down all the way. If you want, easiest way is to overhang it just a little bit and then push it flat. You want this to be nice and perpendicular before you go to solder it. So I'm going to solder this side. And before I do, I'll make sure this side fits as well, I guess. And again, this one doesn't quite fit, which isn't surprising since the other one didn't quite fit and they're made at the same time. So I'm just gonna, again, give this, I'm not hitting it hard. I actually want to use my ring to size it up. There we go. It's a little bit loose, actually. So to fix that, I'm actually going to stretch this band just a smidgen. And I just pushed it up. But I know that's going to be pretty close, so I'm going to prep this again. And I'm just going to make sure, like I said, that this is pushed down nice and tight all the way around. And that's just going to keep it parallel or perpendicular to the edge so that this is nice and flat. And then I'm going to bring back my solder area for a second. This is definitely a medium solder situation here. Let's see if hard. I just got to grab some medium solder. Oops, hit the thing again. Sorry, my tripod is near my camera, so I keep hitting it. Now, I'm going to have to make this a multiple part video. Got 3 good sized pieces. I'm going to actually get a 4th one, and that should do it. I'm going to be filing off most of this. Sorry, I just dropped my solder. There we go. So again, I'm going to flux the edge here. I'd use liquid flux. I don't have to flux the inside because this flux is going to go right through the joint. I could run flux under here as well if I wanted to, but like I said, this stuff does flow nicely. So I'm going to get my medium solder, prep it, warm this up, set it into position, and just 4 spots is good. Once I have my medium solder positioned, what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my solder from along the edge. So I'm going to keep this, warm the inside of the ring. Because the ring is, the core is bigger than this piece around the outside, so I'm going to warm the inside first. Once it starts getting up to soldering temperature, which I can tell by the color of it, I'm going to heat along the edge of both pieces so that the solder is drawn along into the solder joint. Now I'm going to be filing the daylights out of this to get this edge. Now that piece of solder just went onto the sideband, so I'm just moving it over. So I'm going to get some more solder on there because I'd rather have more than less. You're not going to see it. I could figure out what I did with it. Here it is. You're not going to see it anyways. I'm going to be filing off all the excess solder on the outside. So I want to make sure right now that none of my joint is showing. This is the side of the ring. The only thing you're going to see is the solder joint. So this has to be very tight fitting. You should basically have to force it on. And this time I'm not worrying about the interior quite as much because I've already heated it up. And I'm going to get another piece of solder because while it's hot, if I don't have enough solder and I pickle it and I come back to it, it's a lot more troublesome. If I am generous with my solder right now, it is going to make my life a lot easier later when I'm cleaning it up. And I'm not going to clean this edge up until after everything is finished. And the reason for that is I actually want the solder to have, there we go. I want the solder, any extra solder to be there if I heat it up and it draws into place. So we're just going to leave that for a moment. Let that cool off and then I'll put it in the pickle. While that's cooling off, I'm going to prep this guy here. And in this case, I actually have a little piece of solder, hard solder, on the joint. I'm going to take that off. And then re-flatten it. Make sure it's flat. Like so. And then I'm going to determine which side I want to be the inside. I don't want to overwork this because, actually, I'm going to use this side. I don't want to overwork this because I'm sanding this down right now. And then I have to file it and sand it, the outside of it. So if I overwork and take this down too much right now, I am going to run into a situation where I'm going to have thin spots and it's going to start looking pretty nasty pretty quickly. So that'll do. And I'm just going to put this other ring in the pickle that already has a side band on it. And then I'm going to clean up the core, the braid. So now the braid is here, and it must be nice and level and square and all of that sort of hoopla. And it also has to fit on that ring. So we know that this is pretty good. This interior is the exterior of the core. So this sits about 14 1/4. So that means this has to be 14 1/4. Now, because this actually can stretch a little bit, I'm gonna make it just a 14 and stretch it up that quarter. So I'm sitting at a 13. But this is a braid, so it's gonna tighten up. And actually, before I do that, just gonna give it a couple little taps here. This is gonna make it parallel, more parallel. This one here is still got some issues. Make sure that that's soldered, which it is. I'm gonna take a little bit off of that guy there. You're not gonna notice it when it's all said and done, but it does make a difference. And I'm gonna take a little bit of extra solder off of there. Now I'm going to stretch it up to 14 1/4. Again, and give this light tapping. That'll pull the braid together, and it'll pull it up to 14. Now the reason I'm going to go to 14, not 14 1/4, is because it's going to allow me to force it on the ring nice and tightly. Looks good. I am going to tap it once, going this direction, and if you have a ring stretcher, you can actually use your ring stretcher to do what I'm doing right now. But that should do it. And just have a look, make sure there's not too many bad spots. Now, right where my joint is, it's a bit wide. So what I'm going to do, if I can find my parallel pliers. Oh, darn it. Could be in my school bag here. Alright, so I can't presently find my parallel pliers. So, unfortunately, I'm going to find, there it is. So it's got a little bit of a high spot right there. So I'm gonna give it a little tap and see if I can't just squeeze it down right here. really just that one spot. Okay, so now that I have that, and I have my other sideband, I'm gonna grab my ring out of the pickle. Make sure that there's no extra solder. So the solder did flow into here. I don't think it's going to matter much. And ideally I would brass brush this, but I don't have a brass brush right at my bench. So I'm just going to give it a little light sanding. Get that nice and clean. There we go. I'm gonna find my solder joint. There we go. And I'm gonna line it up with the other solder joints and slide it on nice and tight. Check it. There we go. Now I'm gonna actually solder this in a couple spots. And I'm gonna grab right here where, right beside, there's a little bit of a high spot. That's okay. There we go. So I'm just gonna give this a couple little spots of solder on there so it doesn't spin. I could get away with one. I'm gonna do two. And again, I'll do this in medium. They don't have to be big pieces of solder. They're just to stop the braid from twisting. And the reason for that is we don't want the braid to wear out. So braided spinner rings, that's a no-no. They don't last. It only takes one of the sides of a braid to let go before it's garbage. So now, one of the things, I'm using these 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch bars. By putting my solder joint, which is under the tweezers, on top of that bar, it's a bit of a heat sink, and it will help. It'll do two things. It'll help the solder to not flow in that one particular spot, which is where the braid is, because I don't want my braid to open up. However, it'll also let me know exactly where that spot is. I need to pay attention to that. I don't want that to break. So I've got one solder going here and one over here, well away from my solder joints. And so I'm just gonna tuck it in there, right in there, nice and tight. And I'm gonna focus heating the interior more than the braid. So I don't want it to flow on the braid. I want it to flow on the interior. Once it flows, there it goes. Once it flows onto the interior shank of the ring, the core, I can change my direction of my torch. So again, focus on the inside. Get that little bit of solder to flow on the interior shank, and then draw it over to the braid, and then done. Then pickle, actually, for the shortness of the video, I'm gonna cool it off, and then I'm gonna quench it. I check. Make sure that that little piece of solder there and that little piece of solder there aren't going to interfere with my other sideband going on. And so to do that, Moore's disc, just get rid of any extra lump. Kind of important. Now in this case, I do want to clean this. Again, it'd be good if it should be pickled before the next sideband goes on. And then this here slides on. You can see I've got lots of extra space here. That's good. And I want this on here. Now, how do we get this to be nice and tight? I can't just hammer it. I can't put it on my mandrel and hammer it, because if I do that, I'm going to cause the edge to flare. So to do that, if there's any goodness in the universe, this will be a size, not big enough. So I would usually use a ring sizer because I know that they fit. I'm just going to check and see if I have larger ones. So I'm just going to take my larger ring. You can see how it's only sitting on the exterior band. That one's a little bit big. I want it to be as tight over the core. That's good, fits over the core. Now, when I take this and I put this on there and I tap this down, all that pressure is going exactly where I want it. And that should make that nice and tight and even. Then we get our solder area back. And put this guy, again, pay attention to where your joint is. I'm just gonna put that guy there for a second. This time I'm gonna need some fairly good pieces of medium solder. I normally don't fabricate this ring. I normally cover wax. So again, I'm using some significant chunks of solder for this. Part of the reason is I can see I've got a little bit of gapping. This guy here, something's not quite round actually, but it should be fine. So now I got my solder, grab my tweezers, whatever I did with those, torch on. I always grab the solder joint when I dip, and that lets me know where it is. Same as always, let that burn off. Flux all the way around. Again, I don't have to go and flux the top or anything. I'm only soldering the side, but also this, you can see the flux disappearing. I'm going to start off with a very large piece of solder. And staying away from that solder joint there. So I don't want to open up anything. And in this case, I'm going to start with it over here. I'm going to be filing all this solder off. So it doesn't really matter. You can see I've got about a 1 millimeter gap between the thickness of the ring and we want to make sure it joins to the core, because again, the core, although the ring itself, the outside of the ring is getting bigger, the core is a main heat sink. There it goes. And then we just want to follow this along, get another one over here, let that start. Now my last one, I'm going to make sure that it's on the solder joint or very close to it. And what that does is it lets me, get that off of here, it lets me have extra solder for the solder area if I want. Now I'm just going to hold this up so hopefully you can see better, and warming this up. Watch that solder joint. Once this starts to flow, I'll move my tweezers onto the solder joint. There it goes, it's just getting ready now. When you have a large lump of solder like this, you actually, tweezers are getting hot, you actually have to heat the ring a lot to get it to draw around. And I might need a bit more solder on that edge there. You should be able to see your solder flowing along the whole thing. I love not being able to see. It's one of my favorite things. Oh, here it is. I couldn't find my solder. So again, try to get all your soldering done at once. I would like that second band that I just put on, I would have liked it to be a little bit tighter, but it's going to be okay. And just get that to flow along there. Make sure that it's nice and even. Got solder, so I just need to get it to draw to where I want it to go. And since I can't, I'm just going to add another piece. It's very important that I don't overheat this. It's one of the reasons I used hard solder on everything else. Now, there's a gap in my solder joint right here. Now this, like I said, that second band, I oversized it just a little bit. Would have been good. You can see it flowing along. I don't want to have to go in. I would rather have extra solder in place right now. I'd rather have all my soldering done now, and being able to see a little silver line right around this edge will let me know that I've got enough solder. There we go. That's it. So now, I'm not going to bother doing a video of the rest of it, or maybe I'll do a second part. So this side is nice and flush, because that's the first side I did. This side has a lot of extra material. I'm going to cut that off, and then I'm going to finish it. And I should pickle it right now. But again, for video's sake, I'm going to pickle it. And I'm going to rush it through. My pickle is quite hot, but not so hot that I can totally ignore the proper processes. But I don't want to edit this video too much. So now I've got this along here. I'm just going to use my saw, very carefully cut this off, making sure that I don't touch this side band. The first little bit is the hardest part, because you are cutting through quite a thick piece of material. Once you get through and you can see your saw blade on the inside, it does get a little easier because now you're only cutting through one piece at a time. And you just work your way around the ring. Again, don't hit the side band, because it makes sort of like I did there. I'm going to have to clean that up. Now, to make this, I could hold this in a ring clamp to make this a little bit easier. but honestly, my hands are such that I don't normally need a ring clamp. Want to keep the bench between my thumbs, so don't hang it out too much. If this blade cuts through, I want it to hit the bench, not my thumb. Check and make sure that I'm making my way through all the way. Also put it on here. There goes my blade. So that's how much I've gotten done so far. Throw no new blade in. I find my blades here. And continue along here. So you can see I've left a little bit of an edge here. I dinged it once, but nothing major. Now I'm gonna file this edge. I just switched to a more aggressive file because I've got a fair bit of material to remove. There we go. A little bit of a solder line there, but I've got lots of room because I used a heavier wire. So I'm just going to take that down just a smidge. And I file the other side. And I'm going to start off with the slightly more aggressive file again. And we just want to make sure that we have a nice parallel line here. I don't file any thin spots. And that the left side and the right side are even. A little bit of a high spot. Another high spot right here. It's good. Check the other side. It's not bad. This side is actually a little bit thicker than the other side. So I'm going to take just a smidgen off. Now I'm going to take this outer edge off. Without touching the braid, obviously. both sides. Rotary file the inside a little bit. Now remembering that I only have 0.75, in this case 0.8, on the interior for the core band that I made. So it's not hugely thick, and it can't be very thick because you need you need the thickness for the braid to fit. So I'm going to semi-comfort this. I normally would do this side, the bottom side, but for the video, I'm going to keep my semi-comfort to the width of this side band. And then I know that I have plenty of thickness in that space there. And then sand, polish, finish, done. And then sand, no, this is the wrong sandpaper, but sand the side, take it all the way down, polish, and done. That's how we make one of these wedding bands. I hope this was useful.